gun control. With those two little words, you can get a reaction out of pretty much everybody. No matter what side of the fence they're on, just about everybody has some kind of thoughts and feelings and opinions about more gun control. Many believe that more laws are needed to prevent crimes and murders, but many people also believe that gun laws wouldn't really change much, and if anything, they would actually just hurt the average person and the law-abiding citizen, mainly because criminals, by their nature, don't follow the laws and probably aren't going to follow any more gun laws. I personally have no problem saying that I believe more laws would be useless. There's a few reasons I believe this. One of them is a lot of criminals committing crimes with guns have gotten them by illegal means. I knew a guy who had his house broken into and had thousands of dollars of weapons stolen, and there's no doubt that most of those ended up being sold and are out on the street somewhere illegally. Sure, some gun laws might make it a little more difficult for criminals to get what they're after, but if they're set on doing violent crimes, they're going to do violent crimes. This is supported by the FBI's statistics. Most of the laws that are being proposed are aimed at rifles. And the FBI stats from 2018, which are the most current ones available, state that in 2018 there were 14,123 homicides. And of that 14,000, only 297 were committed with a rifle. That's 0.02%. And that 297 is actually down from 2016 and 2017, which were both well over 300. The stats that the FBI have what's listed as knives and cutting instruments was over 1,500. They also had personal weapons, which is basically fists and feet and just beating people with your bare hands. They had over 700 in 2018. That's more than double than what was committed by rifles. So I think that's pretty obvious that the rifles and the weapons aren't the issue, and that is just people killing people. Not only would the gun laws not do much to stop the criminal, it would hurt a lot of the regular population. We constantly see stories in the news about crimes that are being committed with a gun, but we normally don't hear in mainstream medias about any stories where somebody had a gun and protected themselves. Even though I read these stories in other news sites just about every day. There's ones from guys protecting themselves to one I read the other day about a home invasion where the husband was getting attacked and the pregnant wife came out of the back bedroom and shot the intruders. Now, as far as what's being reported, I do understand that news agencies on both sides of any subject are going to report on what supports their cause, or at least, focus on the points and the parts that support their cause. I really noticed this a couple years ago. It wasn't about gun control, but there was two TVs playing, and they each had a different news agency on, and they were reporting the exact same story, but completely different facts, completely different overviews of it, completely different recaps. It was really eye-opening to see the differences. But one of the recent news stories that did actually make it to mainstream about a good guy that's protected people with a gun was back in December of 2019. It was a church down in Texas. There was a man who walked into an ongoing church service and started shooting. He managed to kill 2 people in the church before, luckily, one of the guys in the church was armed and was able to get a clean shot and stop the shooter. Anybody who's been in a church knows that most churches don't have a lot of exits, and they have rows of benches and pews that would make it pretty difficult to get out of there very quickly. So if there had not been armed personnel inside the church, then who knows how many more people this guy would have ended up killing or hurting. Now, this church story is one of the ones where obviously the weapon was actually used, but there are even more times where people simply having the weapon diffuse the situation. One of the biggest stories like this was a group of shop owners in California that became known as the Rooftop Koreans. If you're not aware of these guys out in California, a little backstory on them. In March of 1991, a group of LAPD officers and California Highway Patrol were caught on camera beating the crap out of a handcuffed black male by the name of Rodney King. Once this video got out, people across the nation were outraged by the incident and how the officers had handled themselves. Obviously, these officers went to court and they fought their charges. This court process took quite a while. It took well over a year, and in April of 1992, these officers were acquitted of all their charges. After this acquittal, the city rioted. The city was rioting for about a week. There was arson and looting and killings. Once everything was said and done, there ended up being over 60 people killed and nearly $1 billion in damages done. During these riots is when the Rooftop Koreans came to light. They were a group of shop owners that were located there in LA. They were right in the middle of all that arson and all that looting. The shop owners were not going to let their livelihoods be destroyed and be stolen. So they armed themselves with rifles and they stood guard over their property. They knew the police forces were extremely outnumbered and were not going to be able to protect themselves and everyone and everything. And it's a good thing that they did this, because a year after these riots, nearly 40% of the businesses that were destroyed or damaged still hadn't reopened. These Koreans at this time understood that protection of person and property was ultimately the individual's responsibility. Now, that last part there about the individual responsibility is why gun control is important to me. I'm active duty military in the Air Force, and my job is called security forces. Basically, it's military police. Our primary duties are base security and resource protection, make sure no one's messing with the aircraft or communications equipment or any resources. But we are the base cops, so we do respond to all of the typical police stuff. Yes, it is on a much smaller scale, but we do still deal with drunks, people fighting, we deal with deaths, we have car accidents, all that kind of stuff. So, having been exposed to all of this, I know that sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get to an incident. It doesn't matter how fast that the cops want to respond or are trying to respond, it still can take 2, 3, 5 minutes for cops to show up. I also know that violent crimes tend to happen quickly. They are done within just normally a few seconds, probably less than a minute. So, knowing that it takes a few minutes for cops to show and that crimes are over quickly, I took it upon myself to take the responsibility to protect myself and my family. So I have purchased a firearm as well as a concealed carry permit. Now, every time I leave my house, I have that weapon with me. Some people think that it's a bit overboard or wonder why I do it. I think it's needed. There's obviously no way to know when or if I'll ever be attacked or if I'll ever be present when there is a mass attack. But I do have a wife and I do have 3 small kids, so I'm going to do whatever I can do to make sure my wife and my kids are as safe as possible. Like everybody else, when I do carry my weapon, I hope and I pray that I never have to use it. But it does give me a little bit of peace of mind knowing that I have it and it's there if it's needed. There's been a couple of times where I thought maybe it would need to be needed. One of those times was we were on a road trip and there was some kind of noise with the car, so I had to stop and check it out. We were in some closed business's parking lot in some little town in the middle of nowhere. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I got out of the vehicle and I was walking around the vehicle checking it out, and some guy just walked out of the woods near us. He ended up walking right past us without incident. I don't know if he intended to do anything and saw me watching him, so he changed his mind, or what his intentions were. But I was glad that I was prepared to defend myself if I needed to. Another time that was probably a little more tense, a little more concerning, I guess, was just up the road from us at our local Walmart in town. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and we were loading the kids up into the car, and I noticed the guy walking around the parking lot. Something just wasn't quite right. He was walking kind of weird, kind of wobbly. He was in the middle of the lanes. He was yelling stuff. I couldn't really understand, but I could tell it wasn't quite right. And he actually was starting to walk over in our direction. Thankfully, something else caught his attention, and he started off in the other direction. When we were finally got the kids loaded up and we were leaving the parking lot, there was a couple cops responding with their lights and sirens on. And about an hour or so after that, we were seeing reports online that was about him being arrested. He apparently had been on drugs. He was yelling at people. He was kicking cars as they drove by. Again, thankfully, nothing happened with us, and I didn't need it, but I was glad that I was there and that I was prepared to defend myself if needed. Thankfully, I am here in North Carolina, where it was fairly easy to get my permit, and I'm allowed to carry just about every place that I actually go to. Unfortunately, though, not all states are like this. By this time next year, I'll be moving to California, and out there it's almost impossible to get the concealed permit that I have here. This just means I'm going to have to find some kind of different way to protect myself and my family. I created this video and this post and told these stories to help people understand why more gun control would be a bad idea. Like I said before, it would end up probably hurting the average person more than it would stop criminals. And a lot of these new proposed gun laws don't make a whole lot of sense anyway. There's already background checks being done to buy weapons. Some places like California, you purchase the weapon, but you have to wait 10 days before you can actually take possession of the weapon. It's actually kind of funny that some of these places that have laws like that, with this current coronavirus going on, a lot of people are buying weapons thinking that they may eventually need to protect themselves, and now they're having to deal with these issues, and they're seeing what other gun owners have been having to deal with for years. Another one that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense is the gun show loophole that has been talked about in the news on and off. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It says that you can buy guns at the show without having a background check. Now, yes, sometimes you can pay for the weapon at the gun show and get the discounts, but you're still going to have to go to the retailer later to have your background check done and pick the weapon up then. At gun shows, you still have to abide by all the local, state, and federal laws. If you are a person who still supports more gun control, all I can really ask is that before you give your support, hope that you can research and understand a little bit about what the law is and how it will affect both sides of people. Not only the criminals who probably aren't going to follow anyway, but more importantly, how it will affect the law-abiding citizen and the average person who just wants it to do some hunting or protect their family and property. Hopefully this can get some of y'all thinking. I thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to listen to my rant, and hopefully you learned a little something. Night, everybody.